looking to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Hello and welcome to ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles, delivering to you the latest news in and around the ASEAN region on today's headlines. All right, now to the news. International prosecutors announced murder charges against 4 men, 3 of them Russians with military or intelligence backgrounds, in the missile attack that blew a Malaysian Airlines jet out of the sky over Ukraine 5 years ago, killing all 298 people on board. Take a look.
Vandaag sturen wij internationale aanhoudingsbevelen uit voor de 4 verdachten die wij gaan vervolgen. Ook plaatsen we hen op de nationale en internationale opsporingslijsten. En om die reden maken we de volledige namen bekend en tonen we hun foto's. De 4 personen waarom het gaat. Als eerste Igor Girkin, Sergei Dubinsky, Oleg Pulatov en Leonid Garchenko.
He said all 4 men had been in eastern Ukraine on July 17, 2014, the day of the plane crash, adding they played a crucial part in the armed conflict and that they had important positions. Paulison was speaking at a news conference of an international team of investigators building a criminal case against those responsible in the downing of the Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. All 298 passengers and crew on board the flight from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur were killed on July 17, 2014 when a missile shattered the Boeing 777 in mid-air, sending debris and bodies raining down onto farms and fields of sunflowers. Russia has always denied responsibility for shooting down the flight and claimed last year that the BUK missile came from Ukrainian army arsenals. Russia has also indicated it will not provide legal assistance or hand over suspects. However, if the suspects were convicted in absentia, they would face Interpol arrest warrants if they ever left Russian territory. Meanwhile, the Dutch chief prosecutor of the international team investigating the downing of the Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 in 2014 said it wants to probe further the alleged Russian line of command behind the missile attack that killed all 298 people. The team named a prominent Eastern Ukrainian separatist commander who led the forces in Donetsk in 2014 as one of the suspects.
At this moment, we have the leading figures of the rebels in the eastern part of Ukraine, but they also have lines into the Russian Federation, and we are exploring in our investigation on that still. That's why we did this call for witnesses, and we want to go as far as we can get. So every proof we can get, we're going to put in our file, and we're going to try to get further to that, because it's important to know who can be held responsible for this absolute tragedy. But they had the leading role in the eastern part of Ukraine, and what they did is they ordered for this Buktelar. They got it, they saw to it that it was brought in the area where they were in charge, that it was brought to the launch site, and from this launch site the MH17 was shot down, and they were responsible for this whole operation. Well, 3 of them are in the Russian Federation, and the chance that they will come voluntarily to the Netherlands is of course not too big. But we have a big team who's working on everything what we can, and if we can find them, maybe there will be a chance, but it's a small chance, I believe. And maybe the person in Ukraine, you heard today Mr. Lutsenko saying that they are going to try to find him and arrest him, and maybe in that way we will have at least 1 or maybe more suspects in the courtroom, but the chances are, I must be honest to that, are not big.
Former airline pilot and safety advocate Chelsea Sully Sullenberger, who safely landed a crippled jetliner on the Hudson River 10 years ago, told the House Aviation Panel that the two recent air disasters of the Boeing 737 MAX should never have happened.
Crashes are demonstrable evidence that our current system of aircraft design and certification has failed us. These accidents should never have happened. From my 52 years of flying experience and my many decades of safety work, I know that we must consider all the human factors of these accidents and how system design determines how many and what kinds of errors will be made and how consequential they will be.
Is this a safety?
These two recent crashes happened in foreign countries. But if we do not address all the important issues and factors, they can and will happen here.
He said all 737 MAX pilots should get detailed training on flight simulators. Pilots had complained to Boeing for not telling them about flight software called MCAs or MCAS until after the October crash of a Lion Air jet in Indonesia. That same software, which could misfire on the failure of a single sensor, was implicated in a second crash 5 months later of an Ethiopian Airlines jet.
Reading about it on an iPad is not even close to it. We should all want pilots to experience these challenging situations for the first time in a simulator and not in flight with passengers and crew on board. And reading about it on an iPad is not even close to sufficient. Pilots must experience it physically, firsthand. If we don't learn from these crashes, if we just file the findings away on a shelf to gather dust, we will only compound these tragedies.
I'm here to tell you, Boeing designs and engineers and manufactures superb aircraft. Unfortunately, in the case of the MAX, I'll have to agree with the Boeing CEO. They let the traveling public down in a fatal and catastrophic way. Improvements in aviation are too often, written in the blood of the unfortunate victims of these airplane accidents. But all of us, pilots, flight attendants, airline companies, manufacturers, the executive branch of our government, and Congress, owe it to the victims at the highest level of diligence to make sure these kind of accidents never happen again.
I want to now welcome our witnesses. I'm not going to...
A 6.3 magnitude earthquake hit Papua in eastern Indonesia Thursday, according to U.S. seismologists, but no tsunami warning was issued. The quake hit about 250 kilometers west of the town of Abepura in Papua province at 12:46 a.m. local time, at a depth of 12 kilometers, according to the USGS. The quake was felt weakly in Abepura, but mostly people did not notice it. I was still awake at home, but I didn't feel it at all, and none of my neighbors ran out of their home, Abepura resident Arul Firmansyah told AFP. There were no immediate reports of casualties after the earthquake. Indonesia experiences frequent seismic and volcanic activity due to its position on the Pacific Ring of Fire, where the tectonic plates collide. Last year, a 7.5 magnitude quake and a subsequent tsunami in Palu on Sulawesi Island killed more than 2,200, with 1,000 more declared missing. Southeast Asian leaders must use an upcoming summit to hold unvarnished talks on Myanmar's treatment of the Rohingya, rights groups urged on Wednesday after a report by the bloc was pilloried for whitewashing the persecution of the Muslim minority. The report, commissioned by ASEAN and leaked to AFP earlier this month, gives a glowing assessment of Myanmar's repatriation efforts so far for Rohingya driven into neighboring Bangladesh. Myanmar's military launched a brutal crackdown on the Rohingya in August 2017, causing some 740,000 to flood into Bangladesh, with widespread accounts of rape, mass killings, and the razing of their villages. A repatriation deal with Bangladesh has stalled, with virtually no Rohingya choosing to return to Myanmar due to security fears and the government's refusal to grant them citizenship or basic rights. In spite of this, the report from ASEAN's Emergency Response and Assessment Team predicted voluntary returns would be complete in 2 years. It also refused to use the word Rohingya, an identity denied to them inside Myanmar, where they are instead labeled Bengalis, shorthand for illegal immigrants. ASEAN leaders meeting in Bangkok this weekend must drastically rethink their response to the crisis, according to Brad Adams of Human Rights Watch. UN investigators have called for Myanmar's top generals to be prosecuted for genocide for a 2017 crackdown. The enduring crisis has spread to the region. Some of the 400,000 Rohingya remaining in Myanmar's Rakhine state have attempted to flee their camps to Muslim-majority ASEAN nations, Malaysia and Indonesia. In recent months, authorities in Myanmar and Thailand have stopped boats illegally carrying Rohingya, raising fears of a re-emergence of a trafficking route for the desperate stateless group. Meanwhile, Southeast Asian leaders will dissect the impact of the U.S.-China tariff war this weekend at a Bangkok summit, with Beijing determined to drive forward a trade pact sweeping in 40% of global commerce, but excluding America. Disputes in the flashpoint South China Sea and Myanmar's treatment of Rohingya Muslims are also likely to make the agenda at the two-day Association of Southeast Asian Nations meeting starting Saturday in the Thai capital. But commerce will dominate, with the trade war between the world's two biggest economies pushing some major manufacturers to flee China to Southeast Asia and casting doubts over the future of free trade. U.S. President Donald Trump has imposed tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese goods, from sneakers and socks to washing machines and furniture, prompting Beijing to hit back with levies on $60 billion of American imports. Firms including Brooks Running Company and washing machine maker Haier have already started migrating from China, seeking friendlier, lower tariff markets in Vietnam, Thailand, or Indonesia. With the spat grinding on, Beijing is intensifying its drive to sign a massive trade pact that sweeps in Southeast Asia. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, includes all 10 ASEAN economies, plus India, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. It links about half the world's population and is seen as a way for China to draft the architecture of Asian-Pacific trade following a U.S. retreat from the region. Shortly after his election, Trump pulled the U.S. from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, which would have been the world's largest trade deal, slamming it as an American job killer. Meanwhile, Malaysia has proposed information sharing among ASEAN member countries to enable convicted sex offenders to be identified in a bid to curb their activities, especially pedophiles. In a report in the New Straits Times, Deputy Prime Minister Datuk Seri Dr. Wan Aziza Wan Ismail said the cooperation was vital to ensure that children in every ASEAN country were protected from sexual exploitation, including online. In her speech, Dr. Wan Aziza pointed out that information on the modus operandi of those convicted or charged with sexual crimes could also be used by the authorities to check if these criminals were targeting those beyond their borders. She said this sharing of intelligence can help prevent serial sex offenders such as Richard Huckle from reaching our shores. According to news reports, Huckle, 32, is described as Britain's worst pedophile, who was in 2016 convicted in Britain of 71 counts of serious sexual assaults against children. It was reported that his known victims came from Malaysia and Cambodia. Private sector firms in the Philippines and other countries in the Asia and the Pacific region can access a new technical assistance support for clean energy investments from the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, and the Asian Development Bank, or ADB. In a briefing on Tuesday, the ADB said the agreement aims to mobilize $7 billion in technical assistance, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, in the next 5 years. The agreement was signed by ADB Strategy, Policy and Review Department Director General Tomoyuki Kimura and USAID Asia Bureau Acting Assistant Administrator Gloria D. Steele at the sideline sidelines of the Asia Clean Energy Forum at the ADB headquarters. This initiative is going to provide technical support services that will bring companies and businesses together. It'll try to mobilize financing for projects in the energy sector. It will not provide loans, but it will try to get companies to work together to mobilize resources to finance energy projects in various countries in the region, according to Steele. The agreement aims to accelerate the transition to a more sustainable, secure, and market-driven energy sector in Asia and the Pacific. It will also boost the capacity of clean energy systems by 6 gigawatts and increase regional energy trade by 10% over the next 5 years. And finally in our news, burrowing deep underground, thousands of informal miners risk their lives to find gleaming red gems as a law change spurs opportunity in Myanmar's land of rubies. Take a look. And that is all the news that we have for you for the Southeast Asian nations. Stay updated about the ASEAN region. I'm Alma Angeles, always one with 25.